What's up, everybody? It is the Best Spot Kid Smooth, and I'm back with another video, man. And man, I'm doing this video because I think I'm bored, man. I'm really bored when it comes to some YouTube. So I was watching a video by NXG Next Level Gamer or Gaming. He does NX Gamer. I'm sorry, NX Gamer. He does graphics comparison, graphics analysis, and whatnot, like Digital Foundry, but he does it on his personal channel, and he also does it for IGN from time to time. And I quite like his stuff. I watch his stuff a lot because he kind of gives you this extra layer of explanation, details, and like more details behind his analysis outside of the other options that are there. So he goes into this detail, and he always make it an effort to compare with his PC build, which I think he got like a 2070 Ti, 2070 Super or something like that, overclocked, that he typically does a PC comparison every time he does a analysis and whatnot. But Horizon Forbidden West just got like an update. PlayStation's lately, ever since they've gotten like VR, been boosting their games to do different things to hit over 60 frames per second, which is cool. And this new target of like 40 frames per second if you're on a VR 120 hertz display, right? So in this video, and I knew people would run with this, and I still, in his video, I didn't think it was necessarily necessary. He mentioned that like the Xbox and Microsoft, they're doing absolutely nothing in comparison to what PlayStation is doing when they're up their games to 40 frames per second, or to enable some sort of unique VRR mode. Now, to be brutally honest, dude, for console gamers, the first time anybody have ever heard of VRR and the advantages was everything having to do with Xbox. PlayStation was nowhere in sight with this. So a lot of people only really know about VRR and console gaming and stuff is basically because of Xbox. It first was implemented in Xbox One X, but there was no real use for it. And now that the Series X and S came up, it became more beneficial because of being able to hit frame rates higher than 60 and smoothing out like kind of shoddy performance and whatnot. And you could do unique things with it. So PlayStation has been on a tear as far as like when it comes to games like Ratchet & Clank, Spider-Man, and now Horizon Forbidden West to enable these modes where they can target 40 frames per second, which is better. It's a better rate than playing at 30 if you're playing on a 120 hertz display, and it allows them to get that extra boost in their quality mode, because their quality mode is usually targeting native 4K. The graphics and stuff amped up, but unfortunately limited to 30 frames per second. And in this case, they are, they're able to get that extra 10 frames when they enable that option, right? So in his praise of PlayStation for doing this for games that either recently released and for them to keep adding and getting more out of the system, he sort of took like an unnecessary shot at Xbox. And the crazy thing is, for like ever since the launch of the Xbox Series consoles, the things that we kept getting blessed with were things like FPS boosts and all this other stuff. So the thing is that my take on this, a lot of people are now under this impression that PlayStation, I guess does better enhancements than Xbox or whatever. My thing is, the way I look at it, and as you see this chart behind me, I think both of them do very well at the advancements they do. There's some things that PlayStation does that I wish Xbox does, and there's things that Xbox does that I wish PlayStation had done. And they approach enhancing your library in different ways, right? So on Xbox, we pretty much all of 2021 kept getting updates of like FPS boosts. At the launch of the Xbox Series X and S, they did native next-gen patches or versions of their existing games that came out to kind of help bolster the launch and whatnot. And PlayStation turned around and did the same thing. So PlayStation didn't have like an FPS boost, but they did go out and unlock frame rates to like some of their biggest games. So I've been on record saying, like, shout out to PlayStation for making 40 FPS the new 60 FPS, because a lot of people think because PlayStation have games running at 40 FPS is that this is somehow like a one-up on Xbox. And my main argument against is like, dude, I understand, like, wanting, 40 FPS because it's better than 30, but majority of the games that Xbox has been updated to either to perform at 60 or at 120, or those be the options. So if I have 60 and 120 frames per second as options, I don't need 40 frames per second. You know what I mean? Now the one W that I would give, PlayStation with the enhancements, is PlayStation from a first party standpoint has more games with ray tracing enabled. And I do think PlayStation has some of the best examples of ray tracing available on their first party games, with Spider-Man and with Ratchet and Clank. And the fact that with the VRR update, which is about a year late, they're able to get those games in performance mode to run at higher than 30, and in some cases higher than 60 frames per second, because they have like these unique VRR modes. But when you look at that in the grand scheme of things, it is impressive. But when you compare it to what Xbox has done in the whole grand scheme of things, I don't understand where NXT was coming from. And so he has a lot of people like NXT, especially PlayStation guys, because he tends to lean more PlayStation, and if there's a comparison he has to do, he will definitely point out any advantages that PlayStation is doing over the Xbox, right? He will definitely point that out. So that's what people tend to go when they're mad at Digital Foundry, they go to NXT to see what he has to say, because he's going to highlight more of the positive at the PlayStation, which is no biggie. You know what I mean? I like his content. I think his content is very informal. So behind me is a list of all the games, right? Now, this does not include pretty much third-party games, like, or third-party FPS boosts, or third-party like next-gen patches and stuff. This is literally, there's a caveat to this list. The games that you see behind me are either first-party or owned by Xbox, right? Or they're exclusive to the platform. So that's why you're gonna see some weird things here, but this is as fair as I can potentially get it. So on the Xbox side of things, and I'll make my camera smaller if I can, so you guys can get a better idea of what's going on, right? So on the Xbox side of things, Xbox, I counted essentially 39 enhancements, either first party or FPS boosts, or next gen, some sort of next gen enhancement from Xbox, and I counted 24 for PlayStation, right? And in this list, it includes if the game is either has to be updated by a next gen patch, like with PlayStation unlocking the frame rate and stuff to God of War and whatnot, FPS boost, or a native next gen version of this game, like with the director's cuts that PlayStation did with Death Stranding and Ghost of Tsushima and whatnot, or new releases such as like Deathloop, and those are all included because those are like games that are now taking advantage of the new hardware as some form or fashion, right? So on my tally, I've gotten and if anybody want a copy of this spreadsheet, just hit me up, let me know if you want it. I've gotten 23 FPS boost games to PlayStation 0 because they don't have an FPS boost. I have patches, 9 patches for Xbox, 3 patches for PlayStation. Now, PlayStation technically have more patches, but some of them became disqualified as they made PlayStation 5 versions of those games through director's cut, like the Uncharted's, the Ghost of Tsushima, Death Stranding. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, they initially unlocked the frame rate on those games so they can run a 60. And then they released the director's cut to give like a native next-gen version. So at that point, there's no need to talk about the patch, and now that they got their own version. So they now have 3 and I'm almost, like I said, I'm only really counting like exclusive. Obviously I'm not counting like games like made by EA that whatever. 3 Xbox has 9 of those equivalent patches. And when I say those patches, God of War being upgraded to 60 frames per second. That's a patch. Sea of Thieves being upgraded to 4K 60 and 1080p 120. That's a patch, right? And then you have, you know, next gen, straight up, like this is the next gen version of this game, right? The next gen, I have PlayStation with 21, they're leading the way, 21 next gen releases, and Xbox with 7. And when you compare these two and what's actually taking place, I think all the stuff that Xbox has done is being overlooked. Now let's look at PlayStation's list, since is significantly smaller, right? You have Astro Playrooms, the native PlayStation app, 4K 60, beautiful game, shows you, you know, the controls of the DualSense and whatnot. Deathloop is I think it has a performance mode at 1440p at 60 frames per second. There's a quality mode at like a higher resolution that's not quite 4K. But it has an unlocked frame rate, but it's not like stable at all. And you have the ray tracing mode at like 30 frames per second. I think they have a VRR update since PlayStation got the VRR update. I just don't know if they updated any of the stats. Death Stranding running at 1800p 60 frames per second with the native PlayStation 5 version. You have a 4K 60, which is, you know, less stable. So the frame rate is pretty much unlocked, but you can run this game at 4K 60. Demon's Souls Remake was 4K 30 or 1440p 60. Destruction All Stars was a dynamic 4K 60 FPS. You have Final Fantasy Integrate, which I believe was 4K 60 with their update. Ghost of Tsushima was 4K 60 checkerboard. So, you know, Ghostwire Tokyo had a ton of modes ranging from 1800p at 30 frames per second with ray tracing, 1440p 60 dynamic resolution, and then a 1080p high performance mode that they have. Gran Turismo was 4K 60 with ray tracing and replays. Horizon Forbidden West initially launched at a native 4K 30 and a dynamic 4K 60, but I think it was 1800p. Now with their VRR update, they can run a game at 4K 40 frames per second. That's like, it's, if you want the visual shebang, if you have 120 hertz display, you can run that, the 40 frames per second mode, or they can unlock the performance mode that can allow the game to run above 60 frames per second, which you're getting somewhere between about on an average of 70 frames per second that you get there. So that's been a cool update, and that's really the video that kind of sparked this video. The Neo games, see, these weren't patches, these were re-releases for the PlayStation 5. So it's Neo 1 remastered, Neo 2, I think they came as a bundle. They both are running at like 4K 60 or 1080p 120. Ratchet and Clank has the same amount of modes as Spider-Man with the 40 frames per second ray tracing 4K mode, or the dynamic 4K 60 frames per second mode, and they have the ability to go higher than 60 frames per second with VRR. And then same thing with Spider-Man Miles Morales and Spider-Man Remastered. Returnal was like a weird 1080p 1440p 60 FPS game, nothing special. The ray tracing was not, there's no real ray tracing in that game. Sackboy Adventures standard 4K 60. Last of Us 2 does not have a native PS5 app. It's a patch, and it ran at 60 FPS. And then you got Uncharted, which was a re-release for the PlayStation 5, Legacy of Thieves, which included the last 2 games, Uncharted 4 and Lost Legacy. And there as follows: 4K 30, 1440p 60, and I think 1080 120 for that one. And then MLB The Show, even though they're on Xbox, these are PlayStation first party games. But you know, their enhancements are 4K 60. This is a game that PlayStation is enhancing or making available with their next gen versions. And God of War 2018, like I said, it's just 60 FPS. There's no native PS5 version. It's just unlocked frame rate there. Horizon Zero Dawn, unlocked frame rate 1800p 60 FPS. Ratchet and Clank 2016, I believe, was updated, and I think its resolution was running at like 1800p at 60 FPS. So that pretty much carries out what PlayStation. Now, reminder, guys, my list does not include every game that FPS boosts. I have a separate sheet for every FPS boost game. That's what this looks like. That's all FPS boosts right here. That, so if we were to do that, there would be no discussion. But this whole point was, the reason why I'm saying this, because Next Gen made NX Gamer made it seem like Xbox isn't doing enough or not doing as much as PlayStation is with their enhancements of games. And I thought that was kind of really just seems sort of out of touch. Now, there's a lot more games because Xbox had the ability to go to not just Xbox One games, but Xbox 360 games. I didn't even include original Xbox games, so technically my list is already off because I don't have Xbox One games on here. I have Xbox 360 games. I have when I say Xbox One, original Xbox 2001 games. I have Xbox 360 and the Xbox One games, and obviously now that Bethesda and ZeniMax is all owned by Xbox, their titles are now included because at the time that these updates came, these were essentially first party games and first party updates made. And some of these games are also on the other platform, just like I included MLB The Show just like I included MLB The Show for PlayStation on PlayStation side. On Xbox side, I included things like Doom Eternal and games like We Happy Few. And but if you, a lot of you guys probably don't know, if you have a PS5 and Xbox Series X, a lot of these some of these games, especially if you're Xbox, there's a ton of games that was actually stealth updated and there was no announcements. And there's still to this day there's no videos on Digital Foundry about some of these games. But obviously the FPS boost, all the first party games and stuff that Xbox did, which got those games running at 1080p. Some of these games are like, you know, still at last gen resolutions, but still impressive nonetheless. Giving us Fallout 4 with the 60 FPS update, Fallout 76, Fallout New Vegas, Gears of War 4. All the classic Gears of Wars 1 through 3 all have the option. I think all run at 4K 60 with the exception of 3, which runs at 1440p 60. And then Judgment is 720p 60 because it didn't get a resolution boost. Gears of War Ultimate Edition, you know, 60 FPS. Halo Wars 2, 4K 60. On Series X, 1080p 60 on Series S. Spartan Assault, 1080p 120 frames per second on Series X and X. Prey, 1440p 60 FPS, 900p on Series S, but 60 FPS. Now, and the crazy thing is, even that I'm naming these games, even if they're multi-plat on the other platform, they're not at these frame rates. They're not at these resolutions. Record, 1440p 60. Evil Within is at 1800p 60 or 900p 60. Since it's been FPS boost, you either want to guarantee 60 FPS or you want to like pretty much a better looking game at targeting higher frame rate with VRR. I would go with the 1800p. Wasteland 4K 60, which Wasteland came out in 2020. It's on PS. We all know it's on PS4, but it did get FPS boosted to 4K 60 and 1080p 60 on the Series S and X. That those enhancements does not exist on the PlayStation side of things. Fable Anniversary 4K 60. 1440p 60 on the Series S. Fable 3, I think that's wrong. I don't think Fable 3 Fable 3 is FPS boosted. It is not resolution boosted, so that's wrong. But it still has the an enhancement. Fallout 3 4K 60. It's a and 1440p 60 on the Series S. And I told you about all the gears. Cameo Elements of Power, 4K 60 and 1440p 60. Doom Eternal, like I said, it's yes, it has enhancements on the PlayStation 5, but the enhancements are, you know, slightly better on the Series X. Being able to do 1800p at 120 frames per second, 1800p with ray tracing at 60 frames per second, 4K 60, and Elder Scrolls Oblivion. I believe you could play it on PlayStation 5, but I think it's via stream PS Now, I believe. But you could play it natively on the Xbox Series consoles at 4K 60. That's a difference. Forza Horizon 4 was a native next-gen patch. People forgot that was sort of a stealth update. Gears 5, 4K 60 or 4K 120. You know what I mean? Minecraft Dungeons, 4K 120. Halo Master Chief Collection, 4K 120 or 1440p 60 on a Series S. Or in a Will of Wisp, 6K 60 frames per second or 4K 120 frames per second. It's actually 4K 60 on a Series S. State of Decay 2, 4K 60 or 1080p 60. Sea of Thieves, 4K 60 or 1080 120. The Outer Worlds, 4K 60 or 1080p 60. We Happy Few, 4K 60 or 1080p 60. Crossfire X is 1440p 60. I know it's targeting 4K, but it's 1440p 60, and it has a 1440p ray tracing mode at 30 frames per second. That's where you get the dud the PlayStation. When it comes to ray tracing, they do have more impressive performance metrics because so far the games that Xbox that exclusive to Xbox, like the platform, I think their ray tracing modes are at 30 frames per second. Doom Eternal is technically, it's not exclusive, even though you can do ray tracing at 60 frames per second. Forza Horizon 5, like I said, its quality modes is set to the Ultra preset, 4K 30 or dynamic 4K 60, and 1440p on the Series S, 1080p 60 on the Series S as well. Gears Tactics, 4K 60 or 1440p 60. Grounded, 4K 60 or 1080p 60. Halo Infinite, 4K 60 or 4K 120 or 1080p 60 or 1080p 120, depending on which console you're playing on. Flight Sim, that is I know it's targeting 4K, but I think the real internal resolution is 1440p. Without VRR, it's 30 frames per second. With VRR, you're getting 40 frames per second or better. So I mean, there's a 40 frames per second game. It's just, it is what it is. You know what I mean? And Psychonauts 2, 4K 60 or 1440p 120. And we know Psychonauts exists on a PlayStation as well. However, it does not have the same enhancements that the Series X and S has because it does not have a native PlayStation 5 version. So, in the grand scheme of things, without me including all the FPS boosted games, which is the account that I think exceeds 200 at this point, and other third party support, the Xbox, just in first party internal, what Xbox team's doing, whether they're doing next gen patches or whether Xbox is doing FPS boost or whether it's Xbox releasing a native next gen version of the game, their count and what they're able to do, when you look at the figures, no, there's not a whole lot of 40 frames per second games, and there's not a whole lot of ray tracing performance mode, but there's a whole lot of enhancements. And those enhancements are generally on average between 60, is the worst case scenario, and 120 frames per second. So my argument is, yeah, PlayStation is doing a great job with their enhancements and their internal updates. I love what their studios are doing, but to say that Xbox is doing nothing or that they're outdoing Xbox with these enhancements, I think that's premature, and I think that's wrong and incorrect, because I just proved to you on many occasions with this spreadsheet that Xbox not only has more enhancements, they have more enhancements on current games, last gen games, and like back compat across the board. And all these games are generally targeting a higher frame rate than their PlayStation counterpart. But I thought this was pretty interesting. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you want a copy of the Excel sheet, hit me up on Twitter or whatever. I think I can link this inside YouTube or something like that. I probably can. If you want these details. And I have also another list. This is just total FPS boost games across the Xbox platform. So a lot of people, because I believe there's a lot of people unaware of certain games, that a lot of games that their own has been enhanced and they just don't know because they probably haven't booted it since then. And I know we be going through these dry spells, and sometimes I come out and I revisit some of these games and play them and whatnot. But that's the video I got for you guys. Hope you guys enjoy, man. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. We'll talk to you guys later. Oh, and if just to total out once again, of all the first party or exclusive next gen enhancement by each platform holder, Xbox lead the way with 39 total. PlayStation has 24 total. The difference is, and believe it or not, and I included some non-first party games for PlayStation. I included Final Fantasy and Ghostwire Tokyo and Deathloop. So I'm pretty much helping. of the enhancements, you know, Xbox is leading the way with FPS boost. Xbox is leading the way with patches, and PlayStation is leading the way with actual next gen versions or next gen releases, like PlayStation 5 native versions of the games. So there's that, man. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. I got to get to Weapon Wheel because I'm running late. Xbox is the best box. I am the best box. Good night or good morning if you're on the other side of the globe. I'm out of here. Peace.